Ma'am, shall we start?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Good evening, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar organized by the PG and Research Department of English, Madras College, Chennai. This evening, we gather to explore the profound works of Nobel Laureate Han Kang in the context of peace studies. The event aligns perfectly with our academic theme 2024 to 2025 Conflict, Peace, Reconciliation, and Planetary Wellbeing. And I'm Sayed Ibrahima from 2nd MA English Literature, Queen Maris College, and I will be your host for this insightful session. To begin, let me extend my heartfelt welcome to our esteemed participants, distinguished speakers, and enthusiastic attendees. Today, we delve into Han Kang's literary contributions and their relevance in fostering peace and understanding in a world often fragmented by conflict. Now, let us warmly welcome the chairperson for this webinar, Dr. Preethi Srinivasan ma'am, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English, Queen Maris College, Chennai. Her leadership and academic vision have been instrumental in organizing this enriching event. Thank you, ma'am, for gracing this occasion with your presence. And it is also a privilege to have with us Dr. Samuel Rufus, sir, Associate Professor, Department of English, Madras Christian College, Chennai, as a keynote speaker. Dr. Rufus, sir, is a renowned academic whose insights into peace studies and literature are invaluable. We eagerly await your thought provoking address, sir. We are delighted to have an impressive lineup of paper presenters today, each contributing their unique perspectives on Han Kang's work. Let me briefly introduce them. Ms. Ishwarya M, a PhD scholar from Wales University, Chennai, and her title will be The Weight of Absence, a study of parental grief in Han Kang's Dear Son, My Beloved. And next we have Ms.R. Shiprah Dharshini, Assistant Professor at Women's Christian College, Chennai. And her title will be From Conflict to Healing, a Peace Studies Perspectives on Han Kang's Human Acts. And next we have Ms. Vels, a dedicated PhD scholar, and she'll be presenting on the title It Ends With Us. And lastly, we have Mr. Ganesh S. pursuing his first MA English at Government Arts College, Nandanam, Chennai, and his title will be Biopolitics in the Vegetarian by Han Kang, Family as a Microcosmic Representation of Societal and Governmental Control. Thank you all for dedicating your time and effort to enriching this event with your research. So this webinar will proceed as follows. Keynote address by Dr. Samuel Rufus, sir, and presentations by our paper presenters, followed by a brief discussion after each presentation. And finally, we have an interactive Q&A session where we welcome questions and thoughts from our audience. Without further ado, let us begin with the keynote address by Dr. Samuel Rufus, sir. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Syed Ibrahima. Thank you, Queen Mary's College Department of English. Thank you, Dr. Preethi, my very good friend, for having invited me today. It's indeed a pleasure to see the lineup. So first, I would like to appreciate the theme for this webinar today. Secondly, I would like to appreciate Dr. Preethi for taking the initiative to come up with such a webinar and such a wonderful theme. And the lineup of paper presenters is wonderful, actually. And the papers that they've taken up for presentation today is really, really good. I'm just waiting eagerly to listen to all those papers. And hearty congratulations to the organizers, to Dr. Preethi, for this wonderful, amazing webinar. I think webinars such as these could make a transformational impact in our minds, in our hearts, in our souls, for the better. So they say literature transforms, theory liberates, and research makes a difference. Literature transforms, theory liberates, and research makes a difference. So now I'll just go into the topic, something connected with the topic on peace studies, because the concept of peace studies itself is a beautiful paradox. We call it peace studies, not peace literature. Mostly we use the word conflict, trauma, peace studies, So why this term peace studies, and what is the use of peace studies in today's society? because I've been, most of us are in panels in many universities. We find peace is given a lot of importance. Human rights is being given a lot of importance across universities, especially in this era, which inaugurates a whole lot of interesting eras for us. So, why peace studies first? In order to promote peace, redress the traumas, address conflicts, and promote unity. So, and why do you think there is a lack of peace in society? Many theorists on peace studies would have us believe that one of the main reasons for the lack of peace is intolerance. But peace studies per se begs to take a different turn. It's not only intolerance, it's not only lack of tolerance, what we usually say, but it also relies heavily on misrepresentations or underrepresentations in society. Today happens to be Derek Walcott's birthday, the Caribbean legend who won the Nobel Prize in the year 1992 for his epic poetry, for his wonderful way and sway with words. His Nobel acceptance speech is something really fascinating. And in one of his beautiful long poems, he gives a wonderful line that I wrote today in my class as well. What is that line? He says, I met history once. I'm just repeating the line. I met history once, but he ain't recognized me. So history is personified as a person. I met history once, but history doesn't seem to recognize me. So one of the main causes for lack of peace could also be the fact that a person is not recognized or a person is not represented or rather misrepresented. So when there is a misrepresentation that happens, what immediately follows is a lack of agency. We use this concept in post-colonial studies very often. Agency means my ability to act autonomously the way I possibly want to do it, the way I possibly want to live my life. So lack of agency leads to lack of autonomy. Lack of autonomy leads to a lack of identity, and lack of identity leads to indignancy. You know, the meaning of the word indignancy means righteous anger. Will Durant, in his wonderful short book called The Story of Philosophy, says all revolution is the result of accumulated oppression. I repeat, all revolution is the result of accumulated oppression. So revolution doesn't come about so easily. July the 14th, 1789, the storming of the Bastille prison happened and the French Revolution was born. Wordsworth soon after said, bliss was it in the dawn to be alive. Why did it happen? Accumulated oppression. They were underrepresented or misrepresented, or they were denied their voice. 1970s, how Gayatri Spivak writes this wonderful essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? They were denied agency. That is one of the reasons for distrust. So when you are denied agency, what happens is you lack a platform to speak up for yourself. And when you lack a platform to speak for yourself, what happens is there is a breakdown of dialogue. And when there is a breakdown of dialogue, what eventually happens is, we all know when a dialogue breaks down between friends, just imagine, between two friends, a dialogue breaks down, communication breaks down. They don't see eye to eye. What happens? They both go the different ways. When dialogue breaks down, distrust happens, suspicion happens between nations, especially. We know between India and Pakistan or India and China, we want to engage in bilateral dialogues. Over so many years, we've been accustomed to this fact of dialogues, or Mikhail Bakhtin uses the word dialogic imagination, or Plato uses again the word dialogue. Marx again used the word dialectic, something connected with a two-way talk, where it is not one person dictating something to the other, but it is a two-way path, where I speak out my views, I have the agency to represent myself, I'm not misrepresented. And so this dialogue is important for communication to take place, for trust to take place. But in 1995, if you would remember the year well, Derrida wrote a wonderful text called Archive Fever. This work is very important for peace studies also, because in the archive fever he says the archives are filled with violence and silence. Why is the archives filled with violence and silence? Because there was agency denied to a particular group of people. Lack of agency, which eventually leads to lack of trust, breakdown of dialogue. So in archive fever, Derrida says the archives are filled with what he calls archival violence. When does this happen? When a group of people are denied the right to speak for themselves. They are stereotyped, they are stigmatized, they are silenced, or they are also misrepresented. So over a period of time when it happens, you find that it leads to an insurgence. Michel Foucault uses the word, no? An insurgence or an insurrection. And that's exactly what we find here. Because, peace, there are various vistas to peace, various paradigms to peace studies. I'll just talk about the three types of peace. One is individual peace. Peace within myself, peace within an individual. Only when there is peace within me, the individual, I can talk about the other variety of peace that is called social peace. Social peace means within my family or within my group, social group, be it in college, be it in university, be it in my classroom. First, there should be individual peace. Second, we have a type called social peace. And the third one in the paradigm of peace is called collective peace. Peace between social groups, peace between communities, or peace between states and nations. So when does this happen? Or how does this happen? Hong Kong, the in the history of the Nobel Prizes for literature, in the 123-year history of the Nobel Prizes for literature, the first Asian woman to have ever bagged the Nobel Prize at such a young age, exclusive. No, you could call a young age for the Nobel because most of them are in their 60s and 70s by the time they are recognized for the Nobel. She's just 53 years old, 70 born, a 70s kid like me and Preethi ma'am. So she won the Nobel Prize. Why? Because she says all these traumas should be remembered. When a trauma is forgotten, a slice of history is conveniently sidelined. Derek Walcott says his birthday today, like another famous realistic writer's birthday today, Stendhal, right? His birthday is also today. So he says, I met history once, Derek Walcott says, I met history once, but history doesn't seem to recognize me. When does this recognition come? Or why does this recognition not take place? Raymond Williams talks about three types of cultures or ideologies. One is called the dominant ideology. The dominant ideology teaches me something. The word ideology, by the way, came very close to the French Revolution. They were very surprised. The French people and the European nations altogether were very much surprised by this insurgency, or this revolution that happened in France in 1789. And in 1796, a very famous aristocrat, Tracy, he coined the word ideology. Why? Because he came out of this aristocratic demeanor that he had. He came out of the aristocratic society and embraced a middle class society because he was distrusted, or he heavily distrusted the aristocratic way of life. Then he started analyzing how insurrections happen, or revolutions happen, or violence happens in society. That is when he came up with this word ideology. Belief systems that make me act the way I do. Ideas belief systems, practices, what Judith Butler in 1989 calls the performative or performativity. Systems that condition my way of thinking, my way of acting, my way of judging another person. This is something that I tell my students very often. Ideology is something that helps you judge another person. So when someone judges you as unfair or a loser or something, don't hate them, I say. Hate their ideology that has taught them like that. It's not them. A dominant ideology teaches you a particular way of life, and we and always these ideologies, according to Louis Althusser, they condition us into particular modes of thinking. Dominant ideologies. Raymond Williams calls it, one is dominant, one is emergent. Emergent means what? Something is an alternative social order, it slowly comes up. So, what does this dominant ideology do? Please remember this, as because most of you are research scholars, is ideologies, especially dominant ideologies that we have in society, any society, Trump's ideology, for example, a dominant ideology that we have in society. These ideologies always don't talk good about themselves, but always try to throw mud and hate on the other. They try to create an enemy out of nowhere. It could be any kind of enemy that they create. And this enemy gets all the whipping, the lashing, and the attacks. So, the ideology that is a part of a particular culture or a group or a subset helps them, facilitates their way of judging the world. And this results in what is called a contorted view or a distorted view of life. In some societies, you'll find they say might is right. Why is that? Because they feel their ideological standpoints, the way they've been taught to grow up with, what Benedict Anderson would call imagined communities, are taught to believe to be truth, are taught to believe to be the right way of life. And so this ideology drives them into a particular way of action that they believe is the best. So, what drives my ideological belief? And how do I possibly try to come out of these bigoted mindsets? In the 15th century, we had a concept called the new humanities, otherwise called Renaissance humanism. Let's all remember, not with literature, not with the poets, not with the dramatists, not with the educationists, not with the scholars. Renaissance in England, or true blue literature in England, started with the humanists. And the humanists' very function was to go to all of Greece and take back all this literature from Greek and Latin. And what did they do? Padua, Bologna, Spain, all these places, they went, took these literatures, came back to England, started translating them. So there was an efflorescence of humanism. Why did they do that? They found out that the existing ideologies that their society had was stifling, was a bit bigoted. So they needed something new, an efflorescence, an insurrection that Michel Foucault would call it. So they went and took back some of the best literatures from Greece and other parts of the world, and they translated it into English. And that is how the first literature in English did not come from the poets, it came from the humanists who also doubled up as translators. So Shakespeare, he knew almost little Latin and no Greek, we call him. The reason, but still he is called the Bard of Avon, or one of the best dramatists. The reason, he studied and devoured all the translated classics. And he became a master of the craft. So it was the new humanities which gave a break to an efflorescence of Renaissance or humanism in England. Today, the literatures that we deal with, need a resurgence, a revolution, a renaissance. What is that? The humanities that we have need a break. We need a new humanities that will teach us the way forward, coming out of these dominant ideologies and the emergent ideologies of peace. Francis of Assisi says, "Make me an instrument of your peace." What a beautiful line. An instrument of your peace. A paradoxical line also, peace warriors, peace writers. So, how does this happen in society? Make an instrument of peace, or peace warriors, or peace writers, or champions of peace. It doesn't come just like that, a bolt from the blue. How does this happen in society? I'll be brief because of lack of time. It, he calls, because in Hong Kong's novels also you find this, she champions the voice of the massacred, the butchered, the voiceless. The moment she was announced as the Nobel Laureate, immediately I took the pains to look up Amazon and somehow got one of her books and started reading it. And one of my students also gave me another book. Now, very recently, 2 or 3 days ago, I think she has published her latest novel also, right, which is again something connected with massacres, traumas, and other things. So, coming back, how do we come out of this mode and try to promote peace warriors in society through our literatures? I mean, through the literatures that we do, we have a great responsibility. Derrida says, when he talks about the archives, archive fever, 1995, if I'm right, he talks about migrant archives, like Derek Walcott today. He talks about absence in the archives. History doesn't recognize me. So when does a recognition of the self come? When Gayatri Spivak was asked this question, she said, when the United States was planning to lessen the funding for the humanities, it was Gayatri Spivak who went straight to the president of that university and she said, like here we have vice chancellors, there we have presidents. So she went straight to the president. She said, please don't do that. Like Lord Byron said in the 19th century, if you don't throw a few books at them, they will start throwing stones at you. Books can lead to civilization, to culture, to peace. She calls literature or the humanities as critical health care for the soul. Critical health care for the soul. So, how do we nurture this concept of critical literature as a critical health care for the soul? How do we do that? How do we recognize the other and vouch for an ideology of peace? This is where theory comes to our rescue. Theory always tries to celebrate the other, especially the absent other. When I try to look at the other from an empathetic viewpoint, Voltaire says in one of his very famous quotes, I may not like what you say. I may not agree with what you say. I may distrust what you say. I may hate what you say. I may loathe what you say, but I will defend till my death your right to say it. And this is the philosophy that celebrates the other, the concept of dialogue, where what I say matters, at the same time, what you say also matters. This leads to a dialogue. In the dialogic imagination, in the dialectic that Marx talks about, in the dialogue that Plato talks about, you have this promotion of this egalitarian view to life, where the other is not only appreciated but celebrated. So, only when there is a liberation, there can be a celebration. So, the celebration of the other starts right at the heart of literature today. So, I'd just like to leave three questions for us, probably three questions for us today, because research scholars might be here, postgraduate researchers might be planning to do a project soon. What do you think is the role of literature today? I've asked this question to my students also. I've asked this question to teachers also. But many of us teachers, even me for a long time, has really didn't know the role of a teacher, the role and responsibility of a critique of literature, a peace critic, the role and the function of a student of literature, the role and duties and the obligations of a research scholar today. Just today in my class, I was discussing Arjun Appadurai's 2006 essay, Right to Research, where he says majority of the students who do their elementary school don't have the opportunity to do their higher, primary or secondary or higher secondary education. They drop out of school. Very few come to the higher studies, then higher secondary studies, and abysmally few come for their college education. And out of that, very few come for their postgraduate education. So, where is research? Just 3% in India do genuine research in the universities. Statistics points out the amount that we spend for research. The people who do research in India is abysmally low. What we need today is a resurrection or an insurrection in research scholars who can really contribute to society. Why do researchers from India go abroad? Brain drain, we call it. The reason is the lack of genuine motivation to do research. But you and I can make a difference. This land needs you. This land needs me. This land needs us. This is our land. The research that we do, the perspectives that we give are very important in literature. Derrida, Jacques Derrida, who rose to prominence in 1966 as a young boy for his wonderful essay Structure, Sign and Play. He says, we, you and I and we and us, all of us are textual beings. But Ben Okri, a very young writer today, he says, you and I are storied beings. The stories, so you and I are a product of the stories that are told to us. Believe it or not, the stories that you grew up with, the stories that I grew up with, conditions me even today. That's why Jacques Lacan says the first 7 years, the formative years of a student or a kid, is very important for the kid because those are the years that are formative years. So before the age of 7 or 8, a student or a child has to be formed or nurtured. That's why the right kind of stories that we tell our students, our children, the grammar books, take up the grammar books filled with violence. Raju killed the tiger. Why should Raju kill the tiger? Why can't Raju love the tiger? I shot the sheriff. Why should I shoot the sheriff? Why can't I love the sheriff? The stories that are told to us, the violent parts, when we as literary beings remember that we are storied beings, and every story that we say nurtures the formative ages of the individual, we will surely have a society where these paradigms of peace, from the individual to the social to the collective, will really become a reality. And I wish this wonderful webinar all success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for this wonderful, enlightening address. Now we move on to the paper presentations. I now welcome
Yes.
Ms. Ishwarya M, a PhD scholar from Wales University, to present her paper. Ms. Ishwarya, we look forward to your analysis of grief and its resonance in Hancock's writing.
Syed, I will, as chairperson, I will welcome the, you can announce, and I could welcome the presenter and also offer my comments, okay? Um, so, Mr. Aishwarya, we look forward to your paper on the weight of absence, a study of parental grief in Kang'S dear son, my beloved. So over to you, Aishwarya. I'm really, your abstract says that you're dealing with love, grief, regret, and you're looking at the evocative language and depiction of a heartbreak in Kang'S works. So welcome, please present your paper now. If is Ishwarya on the call? If Ishwarya is not on the call, we'll go to our next presenter, Shiprah Dharshini from Women's Christian College. The title of her paper is From Conflict to Healing, a Peace Studies Perspective on Hong Kong's Human Acts. Ms. Shiprah, once you present it, we will have
Yes,
illustrations
ma'am.
and responses at the end. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Myself, Shiprah. Okay. I hope my presentation is visible.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Thank you. So the topic for my presentation is From Conflict to Healing, a Peace Studies Perspective on Han Khan's Human Acts. So before moving on into talking about my presentation, I would like to give a very brief summary about the text. So Human Acts is a novel, is a creative non-fiction published in 2014, and the novel is set from a multi-perspective narration where it is set from a second-person narration. Through the narration, we can delve into both the conscious and unconscious narratives of the characters. So the main event of the novel talks about the student uprising movement that happened in Gwangju, South Korea, which happened between May 18 to May 27 in 1980. So it's a Gwangju is a province which is located in the southern part of South Korea, which is very much divided the from this from the capital state. So the student protesters movements was started on May 18, 1988, who revolted against the martial law, which was implemented by the then president, Mr. Chun, and he formed a government which was a totalitarian government where his rule oppressed people, and there was a ban on press, media, and people, and the truth was hindered. So before moving on into talking about the violence which was happened to the people, I want to, and the peace uh, approaches that can be applied, I want to identify and draw a relation between violence and peace. So I go with the words of Galton. Galton states that it is necessary to understand. Galton states that violence as the efforts applied to people to fall behind the physical and mental potential, and draws a wide-ranging framework from economic inadequacy to wars, from ideological perspective to peace. So in the novel, we see that how the student protesters so strategic step, and each side was chapter is set from main idea behind changes which was happening during that time. So uh, Galton states that violence has different forms and different kinds. So I first start off with addressing what kinds and forms of violences that was uh, existing against people. So Galton states that there are three forms of violence. One is direct violence, structural violence, and cultural violence. So direct violence is often associated with easily identifiable harm, but systematic impact. So, at personal level, it leads to suicide and self harming for the individual who are directly or indirectly affected by it. So, I quote in the chapter "The Prisoner 1998." The character Kim Jin So he states that I'm fighting alone every day. I fight with the health that I survived. I fight with the fact of my own humanity. I fight with the idea that death is the only way of escaping. We see that uh, when the timeline of the chapter is 1980, it's nearly a decade after the incident happened. The incident happened in 1980, and we can see that the violence which happened, it did not cause only physical was a key when this violence started. He was a teenager, and now he is a young adult who is in his who is in his early 30s. And we can see how he is every day, though he has fought, and it can be said that their voices had been heard by people, even though now the effects of what he underwent is really traumatizing for him, that he finds is really hard to live each day. And the second quote is from Yong Che. He is also a person. He is a cousin of Kim Jin So, and he said that he too they survived after the war a decade later, but the repercussion of the period uh, has been ingrained into their mind, that the life which they are living are so traumatizing. And this is a quote where Jinsu says that the public defender said Yongche has slit his own wrists 6 times in the past 10 years, and later it is revealed that he has been admitted to the psychiatric hospital. And the second type of under direct violence is the interpersonal level. It Interpersonal level, it includes emotional and verbal abuse as well as coercion and threats directed at individual. So in the chapter The Editor 1985, we see the character Kim Young So. She was also one of the protesters who were directly involved in protesting against the totalitarian regime, and she works as an editor, and she plans she collaborates with a translator to publish a play about the events which happened during that time. And we can see that when she publishes the draft of the play to the censor officer, she has been slapped brutally by the interrogative officer 7 times, and she takes and the entire the chapter The Editor 1985 deals with how Kim Young So takes a week to forget each of the slap. Okay, each of the slap, and I quote her line: Editor Kim Young-sook received 7 slaps to her right cheek, begins the process of forgetting the 7th slap, one per day, then it will be over and done within a week. And the next, it extends beyond communal violence and includes mob violence, violence by law enforcement, and other form of state-sponsored violence that restricts or harm individual. The next character is Seon Jong. Works. She is a friend of Kim Yong Sok, and this is a quote where she said, "The reason the soldiers let you ride around broadcasting all day, waiting until the dead of night before forcing your van to a halt and arresting all its occupants only occurred to you later. They simply didn't wanted to expose their movements. So the context behind this quote is that Seon Jun, she works in a labor union, and she and along with her friends, they go out in morning and they gather in the public space and they protest against and they put slogans against the ruling party, and they said that how the media presents the student protest movement is how it has been fabricated, and they want to tell the truth, but in the morning and uh, till the afternoon they are allowed to talk about and protest. But when evening comes, the story changes and how the military takes in control and they kill everybody. And the irony is the people, after they are killed, they are given uh, the state is honoring the same people who are protesting against the state. So the second type of violence is structural violence. So it is called structural violence because it has its implication within political and economic system, and it is referred as violence because it inflicts harm on an individual. So Galton, he states structural violence as the general formula behind it is inequality and above all in the distribution of power. The operation of the structure involves lack of transparency, accountability, and produce mass incarceration. And I want to quote again Seonjun quote, and she says that the fact that I ended up with pathological aversion to physical contact, particularly towards men, that I willfully destroyed any warmth, any affection, whose intensity was more than I could bear, and ran away. The context of this quote is that um, so Galton states that the operation of this structure involves lack of transparency and accountability. So we see that Seonjun was also sexually assaulted by the interrogative officers, and how they are presented, the interrogative officers, the soldiers, and the lawmakers are presented as someone uh, who who are presented by the media of that time, how they are the sole protectors of the government and the sole protectors of the democratic order. But in fact, there's an on the other hand, uh, their truth is not being let out, and these people are facing uh, a numerous amount of violence by them. And the second quote is by an unnamed narrator who comes in the chapter The Prisoner 1990, and he says that I found out later that the army had been provided with 800,000 rounds that day. This was at the time when the population of the city stood at 400,000. In other words, they had been given the means to drive a bullet into the body of every person in the city twice over. It says that the structural violence, which is so strong, that how it plays the in the it's more like the army men and everybody. It's more like Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In the morning they protect the people, the protesters, and in the night time they kill, they assault and torture people who protest against the government. So the third type of violence is the structural violence. So structural violence, on the other hand, is defined as violence that makes direct and structural violence looks or feel right, and it justifies direct violence, and it also normalizes structural violence, and it distorts reality to the effects of these are less visible, and it also diminishes or conceals the sufferings of victims of war and dehumanizes the targeted enemy. So the following quote is also by the unnamed narrator. He says that this is said from the time where the unnamed narrator and Kim Jung-soo are placed, since they were leading the student protesters. These are they undergo a separate kind of torture in the military cell where they are placed in the cell for over 6 months, and everybody a group of 15 members are placed in one cell, and they have to uh, eat, pee, and sleep in the same room. And at the end of the 6 months, this narrator he understands why are they being tortured, and he says that at the moment I realize what all this for. The words that this torture and starvation are intended to elicit. We will make you realize how ridiculous it was, the lot of you waving the national flag and singing the national anthem. We will prove to you that you are nothing but filthy, stinking bodies, that you are nothing better than the carcasses of starving animals. So the approaches to peace building. So peace building as an approach, it doesn't only talk about or deal with conflict transformation, but it rather creates a space for people to interact in new ways, and it gives a space for them to communicate their experiences. And also, it is not a static process, but rather it's a dynamic transformation that happens between individuals and groups who are directly or indirectly affected by the violence, to give them a more stable and peaceful coexistence. And also the associative approach stated by Johann Galton, he says that he emphasizes peace building through understanding, dialogue, mutual respect, striving for collaborative solutions to conflict rather than relying on force or isolation. So he says that the ultimate peace for in a longer time basis can only be achieved when the conflict and the violence is being understood, and uh, and how it is given mutual respect. And also I want to concentrate on the term dialogue. As sir said that there's how in Han Khan's she uses language, she uses the memos, even though it's the novel is a creative non-fiction. The characters which are represented in the novel are fictional characters, but the events and the data which has been presented in the novel are factual. So she, with the help of this novel, she uses language as a medium through which she constructs dialogue, through which she gives them a space, a place for recognizing, a place for giving them her justice. So during that time, the political crisis of 1988 made it difficult for workers. Works addressing the upheaval to be presented were made it difficult to present it freely. And Galton, in his peace building approach, he says that there should be a transformation on both cultural and structural violence to create more just and peaceful society. And he also states that healing and recognition are only possible when truth is acknowledged, when injustice are addressed, and deeper systems of oppressions are dismantled. We see that how Yoon Suk, whenever she produces a work to the census officer, most of her works are completely rolled out. More than half of the sentence in the 10-page introduction have been scored down. The percentage rises so that the vast majority of the sentences have been lined through them. So, when we talk about peace, we can't ignore the role of power in implementing the peace to the people. So, I take Hans Morgenthau in his book Politics Among Nations. He says that how the balance of power and policies aiming at its preservation are not only inevitable but an essential stabilizing factor in a society of sovereign nation. He also emphasizes that peace could only be achieved by recognizing and accommodating the inevitable conflicts of interest. Similarly, Quincy Wright, in his book A Study of War, he explains how peace that revolves around the balance of power can promote peace by ensuring no single state becomes overly dominant and uses its power to intimidate others. He also believes that peace should be viewed as a dynamic state that demands ongoing effort and institutional backing rather than merely the end of conflict. We can see that how, with the role of power, it has the ability to implement peace. And also similar to Jung Sok in the novel, we see in the last chapter we see uh, title epilogue the writer 2013. We see in this chapter where Han Khan's she herself represents herself through the character the writer 2013, which the date is really close to the publication date of the novel, which is 2014. The writer in this chapter, she says that how she is also persistent like the character Yungso, who wants to represent, who wants to uncover the past events. She says that when she was finding the documents which the documents which has the exact kind of death rate, the kind of uh, data which has not been fabricated. She states that when I first started poring over the documents, what had proved most incomprehensible was that this bloodshed had been committed again and again, and with no attempt to bring the perpetrators before authorities. Acts of violence committed in broad light without hesitation and without regret. Commanding officers who could have encouraged no, even demanded such displays of brutality. And also, John Drawell, in his book A Theory of Justice, states that the role of distributive power and the role of institutional power, and how power should be maintained in order to create a democratic political order. He further states that peace should be conditioned and regulated by a shared public concept of justice. We can see in this novel this shared concept, shared public conception of justice doesn't prevail in the novel, because uh, the the main reason why the protesters are against the government is because of the martial law which was implemented during that time. It was because they thought that North Korean spies have invaded their country, and that was the reason why that was the reason of the assassination of the previous president. And for that reason, they said that the whole country should be in under the martial law. See, they said that in order to have a whole democratic country, or to regain that kind of law and order in the state, they should have just like John also, they should have, the society should have a shared concept of justice. And also uh, and we can also see that how the military was granted absolute freedom to kill, assault, and torture people with no authoritarian check. And also, we can see there are several events in the novel that exhibit the distortion of the democratic order, and this was compromised for the sake of law and order. In the epilogue, we see the writer how she states the soldiers were provided with lead bullets, despite these having been banned by the International Court of Law on humanitarian grounds. Um, and also, theorist Edward H. Carr, he states in his opinion that the role of power in creating peace, through which ordinary people hold peace and its relation to conflict resolution. In his book, The 20 Years Crisis, he states that how absolute justice cannot be achieved through rules alone, but rather through pragmatic approach that ensures a balance of power. We can see that how in the line absolute peace cannot be achieved only through rules, but but it can only be achieved through pragmatic approach that ensures balance of power. Galton also says that peace cannot be achieved, or peace cannot be exerted upon people by enforcing upon them law and order, but it is the ideology of the people that should be changed in order to implement peace in a for a longer time base. In the novel, there are instances when the government enforces certain rules upon people, believing they could stop the people from protesting further. Also, in the final chapter, we see there's a quote by the president's bodyguard bodyguard to eliminate people who are seen as an obstacle to the state. It is said that in autumn 1979, when the democratic uprising in the southern cities of Busan and Masan was being oppressed, President Park Chung-hee's chief bodyguard Cha Chi Sheol said to them, "The Cambodian government killed another 2 million of theirs. There's nothing stopping us from doing the same." We can see almost all the characters in the novel who are directly experienced trauma from the riots, as well as the family of the deceased, are haunted by the memories of the past. So, to fully grasp the concept of peace, it is essential to define what violence is, and this helps to develop specific methods for addressing it. In the novel Human Acts, Han Khan portrays the long term impact of violence on both individuals and communities, and she demonstrates that healing and reconciliation are possible only when people of violence on individual and communities, showing how healing and are possible. Sorry, I have been repeated this. And the last point is the only way through which they can heal and seek justice for the deceased is only by retelling their stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiprah. And let me first congratulate you on such a wonderful presentation. You have certainly made a contribution to peace studies and our learning, which we have actually been engaging with over about 6 months now. We are into peace studies, and whatever you presented lines up so beautifully with what Rufus sir was emphasizing about literature which transforms, theory liberates, and research makes a difference. And I think these statements are a complement to your work as well, because you have aligned theory from peace studies. You have connected theory with the text. And I refrain from saying that you have used theory as a lens or a framework, because that will, be very suffocating or would kind of impose on the work. But we appreciate the way you have connected the text with this theorist, Johann Galtung. Yes, and we had been learning also in our peace studies over the 6 months about negative peace, positive peace, by which this theorist has works of Hong Kong today. I want to assure you that you have made an important contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
We'll
Thank you so
move
much.
on to our next presenter. We'll take the questions at the end. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
We'll take the questions at the end. Yeah, we'll take the questions at the end. So I now invite Senya Vale to present her paper on the next work, The Vegetarian. The title of her paper is It Ends with Us.
Am I audible and visible, ma'am? Am I audible, ma'am?
You're audible. Can I just read your abstract?
I actually deviated a little from my abstract, ma'am.
Senya Vale?
So shall I continue with the presentation? Am I
You're,
audible,
you're
ma'am?
okay, okay. So I now invite Senya Vale to present her paper on the, yeah, Senya Vale, you can present on the vegetarian.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Good evening to all the literary doyens who have gathered here. I would like to begin by thanking Dr. Maria Preethi Srinivasan, head of the Department of English, Queen College, for giving me this opportunity. And I also thank Dr. Rufus sir for those insights he had presented in his keynote address. And sir is someone who always pushes the students to be who we truly are. So thank you so much, sir. And Saeed Ibrahima, thank you so much for the work you're doing. And wherever Nancy Mamis, thanks a lot, ma'am, for your support. Hong Kong is not a vegetarian. So why did she write the vegetarian if she's not going to propagate that kind of diet? And in this work where a woman renounces meat, she actually does not idealize vegetarianism, but she opens the book for exploring her own riddles regarding life. And as we learned about Juan Galtung, the founder, the Norwegian sociologist and founder of these studies, he describes something about personal peace, that is resolving conflicts and the impact of conflict within oneself. So this paper attempts at reading the works of Hong Kong the vegetarian and Quinn the white book and finding ways to attain inner peace. So the vegetarian is written in three parts, and the first part, the vegetarian, it's called the vegetarian, begins with the husband of Young Hee, the protagonist, narrating the story to us. The novel opens with the line, "There's nothing remarkable about my wife until she turned vegetarian," and he describes that his wife is an extraordinarily ordinary woman who writes bubbles for comic strips and who is a junior tutor at an institution. All of a sudden she turns a vegetarian because she has some nightmare about having her hands being pulled with blood, and she could hear the sound of animals being slaughtered behind a door, and then there's a weird taste in her mouth. All of a sudden the next morning she turns a vegetarian by cleaning her house of meat, and she starts to waste away. And this husband questions her why is she all of a sudden taking up a vegetarian diet, and she for the first time talks back to her husband, saying that he has only one meal at home and it will not be a big deal for him to skip meat for just breakfast. And the problem is that he is not even bothered about his wife dwindling, but the major concern for him is that she is not complying to any of his physical needs. And days go on, and then we can also find this husband to be someone who insists on her undergarment preferences, and he's someone who's constantly attracted to Young Hee's older sister, Inke. And one fine day they go on a official dinner, and because Young Hae doesn't eat meat, she becomes the central topic of conversation for everyone around, because eating meat is a major part of Korean diet. And people question her whether is it because she turned into spirituality, or is it some underlying health condition that prevents her from eating meat. And she begins to start her "I had a dream" speech, which he abruptly interrupts and mansplains that just that she doesn't prefer to eat meat because of blah 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 something else. And he feels embarrassed because his wife did not fit in that official dinner. So when he comes home, he tattles on her to her family members, and the entire family comes to town and they try to force feed meat to her. She initially defies them, and then her father tries to manhandle her, slaps her, and then forcefully puts meat in her mouth. And immediately, the so far taciturn, submissive woman Young Hae becomes violent by brandishing everyone there with a knife, and she slits her wrist, and she just passes out. When she's taken to the hospital, the major concern the husband has is that his shirt is stained with her blood, and he doesn't want to look shabby in the eyes of others. And the doctors also find that this woman is lacking energy, so the mother tries to sneak meat into her soup, and she unconsciously consumes it and then vomits it out. And the first part ends with Young Hae finding her, I mean, Young Hae being found in the hospital, uh, almost undressed and having a live bird in her hand, and having dug her teeth in the flesh of the live bird. And the second part opens with Young Hee's brother-in-law, her older sister's husband, narrating the story to her. It's called The Mongolian Mark, and obviously in this part, we find how he is in turn obsessed with Young Hae, and he's a video artist, and he has this weird idea about flowers blooming from the bodies of human beings, and he finds a collision of flowers through human bodies. So he wants Young Hae to be his model, and then he betrays his wife with Young Hae. And when Young Hae's older sister In Hae catches them, he attempts suicide, and then the ambulance comes and they take both Young Hae and In Hae's husband to the hospital. And the third part is called The Flaming Trees, and it is narrated through the voice of In Hae, the older sister of Young Hae, where we find In Hae being this responsible, self-reliant, strong woman who's a single mother, and now as she has divorced her husband because of his betrayal towards her. And she is someone, and we find that she is kind of guilty for letting Young Hae go into this condition, because as a child, she, being the elder sister, had always taken care of the family, doing the chores, and the father maintained a distance with In Hae. But in the case of Young Hae, the timid one, the reserved one, was always the person who took the violence of the father. And there's this one incident where Young Hae was a child, was made to witness and eat the meat of a dog which bit her. And it is something so cruel that when the dog bit her, the father tied it to his motorcycle, went in rounds, and made the dog die of exhaustion by frothing. And then the dog was burnt, and Young Hae was forced to eat that meat. So all of this tormentation and also the physical abuse the child underwent was something deep inside her. And then we find by this part that Young Hae is completely wasting away, and she is even taken to a mental hospital. And doctors find that she's catatonic, schizophrenic, and also anorexic. That she initially gave up meat, now she is giving up solid food itself, and she doesn't want to eat anything because she thinks she's going to transform into a tree. And she is not eating anything except drinking water and absorbing sunlight through her body. And the novel ends with Young Hae being forcefully taken to a general hospital where they might probably give her some nutritious food intravenously. And we do not know whether she would take it, whether she would be alive. But when the work ends, there's this abrupt ending. So there are many scholars who interpret this work as a defiance against patriarchy, because there's a lot of patriarchal violence, male chauvinism, and then physical abuse, marital rape. All of it is taking place. So there's this one idea. And then we also find this novel being written in three parts. Everyone else except Young Hae is given a voice. This novel is about her, but she doesn't get to speak for herself. And only in a few places she mentions her.
Deepika, can you turn off your mic?
So we find everyone else other than Young Hae speaking for herself. And and there's this one a place where Young Hae says that she hates every other organ in her body except her mammary glands, because everything else could hurt anyone else, be it her nails or hands or even her eyes. And there are so many papers which read this work as a work where Young Hae becomes a tree, because she's transforming from the place of a human being that takes the life of another being into a tree that doesn't even harm the space it is holding, because the roots actually hold on to soil and prevent soil from eroding. But is this work really that? Because in an interview, Young Hae because in an interview, Hong Kong has said that she was a person whose hometown was Wangshu, where actually on the Wangshu massacre, on which Human Acts was written. And we find that just before May 18, her father became a full-time novelist, quitting his teaching position, and they moved to the city. So she was indirectly a victim of that Wangshu massacre. And this had always been in her memory, and this trauma had been underlying, and she had been getting a lot of nightmares. That's why we find nightmares being a huge part of the vegetarian. And we also find that she, not being a vegetarian, but she having these questions whether human beings can completely be non-violent. Can human beings be 100% innocent? What is sin and what is redemption? So these were all the questions that pushed Hong Kong to write the a vegetarian. And in Galton's Routledge Handbook of the Peace Studies, there was one essay called Art and Peace, written by Patrick McCarthy, and he begins this essay with an anecdote about the French painter Matisse and the Spanish painter Pablo Picasso running into each other immediately after the World War. Yeah, after Second World War in 1937, and the legend goes that they had a conversation. How nice it could have been, and nothing of these would have happened if people did their jobs as well as we do. And McCarthy continues that artists are people who don't have time to do anything else other than arts, and artists are people who do not have the mind for anything other than art. So now we're going into the next question: what is art then? Because we find um, Tolstoy explaining that art is transmission of feeling. In that case, if art could be propagandist, we can also find art being pro-war. And McCarthy jokes that the writers are actually saved from being supportive of war, because if one book gets burned, there's always another copy. But the real victims are sculptors and painters and artists. On the other hand, what exactly is art? Art is a conscious attempt to trigger the emotions of the other person with a specialized technique. So how could art make a difference? So we move on to the next question. What can art do? So as Rufus opened the forum for us with this question, what is the role of literature at present? Mm, Art can be this canvas where society can express its rage, because McCarthy poses this paradox: is it fine to have peaceful art in a problematic society, peaceful art in a violent society, or is it fine to have a peaceful society with violent art? I think the latter is better. So in that case, thinking about this, we move on to the highly autobiographical work of Han Kang Huynh, which is the Book of White, because uh, she writes The Vegetarian, and then she has this tremendous success, but she was severely criticized by certain people of Korea for airing Korea's dirty laundry in the public. And then a Polish editor comes down, and she invites Hong Kong over to Poland. So when she goes to Poland, the city being covered with snow and all the whiteness reminds her of her older sister, who died 2 hours after birth. And the work is written in 3 parts: na, which is I, and it's quite fascinating that that is also the word we use for Tamil for the first use in Tamil for the first person. And this again links the Korean and Tamil root. So na, I, and then she, and then the third part is all whiteness. So the first part, she begins with a flashback that her mother was just 22 years old when her father was teaching in an isolated village in Korea, and then their house was far removed from the other part of the village, and the only phone available in the rustic town was in a shop near a bus stop. And the mother was actually 7 months pregnant, so her due date was far ahead, so there was no preparation. But she prematurely went into labor, and there was no one around, so she herself boiled the scissors to cut the placenta after the child is born, and she goes into labor all alone. The child's born, she cuts the umbilical cord and then covers the child in in a white robe, and then the mother desperately whispers into the child's ear, "For God's sake, don't die." But the child, after 2 hours into birth, dies. And then the mother had lived with trauma all her life. And this memory had been passed on to little Hong Kong, and she had always felt guilty about this older sister. She had always longed for this older sister. So when she goes to Poland, everything, the snow on the street, a white dog which she had encountered when she was in her 20s, her boss, her previous boss, who had once told her about wanting to meet his former lover once when both their heads turned completely white. So everything that is white, salt, mountains, and a white doe in the apartment where she lived during her stay in Poland. Everything reminds her of her sister, especially a crescent-shaped mooncake to which her mother associated her sister. And we find that towards the end, there's a part called Onni, which is the word in Korean for older sister, and Hong Kong yearns for the sister. How nice it would have been for her to have an older sister who would make her fears go away when she is in darkness. How nice it would have been to have an older sister who would do math equations for her. How nice it would have been to have an older sister who would remove splinters from her toe. And then she goes into a sense of guilt because had that sister been born, some 3 years later, she would not have come to this world. So she thinks that she had stepped on the toes of her older sister, and she apologizes, and then she regrets because her mother had always regretted. Wouldn't it have been better if there was an ambulance that could have taken her to the nearest hospital? Wouldn't it have been better at least to have a phone nearby to for her to get help? Wouldn't it have been better if she could have been taken to an hospital and had access to one of those incubators which were quite new back then, so that the child's life could have been saved? And this regret, guilt is and yearning for this older sister is traumatizing her. But towards the end, we find Hong Kong writing that this life, this eyes, this writing is all a dedication to her older sister, and with this body she would view everything her older sister had missed in her life. So she makes this book as a tribute to that sister who had lost her life immediately after birth. And we find that um, the idea of vegetarianism is not actually a concept that stays away from violence, because one, culturally Korea has been a country which is a meat consuming country, and it is quite easy to actually judge people with our own ideologies, because we think that eating meat is actually something quite violent, and uh, uh, being plant-based is something non-violent. Actually, it's not, because the word violence itself comes from the Latin word vita, which means life. And Nietzsche says that the very paradox of life itself is taking the life of other. In order to live, one must kill, being it even taking the life of an edible plant, because we find plants actually secreting lectins, which is present in the bran and outer coverings of pulses and grains. And there's something called alkaloids present in the peridome, the outer skin of potatoes. And then there's something called cyathin glycoside, which is a component present in aubergine, eggplants, in stone fruits like cherries, apples. These are all plant toxins which happen to be a reflection of the defense mechanism of plants, because they want to protect themselves from any predators. Doesn't that mean that by eating plants we also take life? So life, but we're fine with a short scale violence, but we're not fine with violence that is oppressive or violence that leads to war. So then what is the right form of violence, or where exactly art stands or literature stands in making peace? And we find that life being a circle, we take something from the environment, in return we give ourselves to the environment, just like Han Kang, who had found her life being her life arising from the space of her sister's life is actually a tribute to her own sister, and how she uses her life to fill up the void her sister had left. That is one thing. And then we also find that um, Hong Kong says in an interview, love sounds cliche, but it is real. And even if love makes us feel a lot of pain, love is something that expresses its authenticity through pain. So, to answer our first question, what is the purpose of art and how can it make a person find inner peace? We cannot actually find inner peace by writing, because there are these healing techniques like journaling help to which help to express and relieve of pain. That doesn't work actually in a lot of cases. So how come writing or art can be therapeutic just for the sake of expressing? Because art can be a canvas where societal rage can be released. So we don't have to do that in the real society. And apart from being a space for expression, art happens to be a preservation of memory. So by preserving the beautiful memories of someone or an incident, or even preserving the shattering moments or the tribulations we've gone through, art happens to be uh, like an ideal towards which we can turn up to, and art happens to be the preservation of a memory which helps us to hold something um, separate from our day-to-day reality, and art helps us to move on from our day-to-day life. And we find that uh, the interesting aspect that she has used the term hun for her book, because it is not exactly white. It's not the color white, it's the shade white, which means it can be the white of a swan, it can be the whiteness of snow, it can be the whiteness of ivory. It is the shade, the different shades of whiteness, indicating that art cannot be something that is convergent. It can be transformative. So thanks again for this opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Senyavel, for your thought-provoking presentation on the vegetarian and the White Book, and reflections on art and how whether it is therapeutic, and actually showing us the complexity of human expression, and not be making art simplistically therapeutic. Yes, you brought out uh, the trauma that is there in the novel The Vegetarian, uh, the patriarchy, and actually that novel is really very, all her writing is surreal. That element of surrealism is there in what I have read of The Vegetarian and this human acts. So thank you for that that treat that you gave us through your presentation.
Thanks a lot.
And we move on to the next speaker, Ganesh. So I welcome Ganesh to present his paper on Biopolitics in the Vegetarian by Hong Kong, Family as a Microscopic Representation of Societal and Government Control. Actually, so I think Ganesh is going to give us a very different perspective on the vegetarian from what we have heard so far. Welcome, Ganesh. Ganesh is a first MA student at Government Arts College, Nandanam.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Is Ganesh on the call?
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Ganesh,
Ma'am,
let
am
me
I
call
audible,
him in.
ma'am?
Yes, Ganesh, you are audible.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. A very good evening to the friends and fellow mates, along with Professor Dr. Rufus sir and Dr. Preethi Maria ma'am, for giving me this great opportunity to present my paper. And the topic that I have selected regarding Han Kang's peace studies is the biopolitics in the vegetarian, and the topic is family as a microcosmic representation of societal and governmental control. Ma'am, is my paper visible, ma'am? Is my screen visible?
Yes, Ganesh.
Yeah.
It's slowly coming up. Yes, it's coming.
Yes, ma'am. So this is my abstract. Through this paper, we are going to see the perspective of the vegetarian in a different point of view. So the vegetarian family as a microcosmic representation. So according to Michel Foucault, he defines biopolitics as the systematic study of political decision-making modes and its justification with particular reference to the royal moral relationship among individual, groups, communities, the formation of consensus, the determination of constitutionally relevant topics, the resources allocation strategies, the conflict upholding the conception of citizenship on life and health sciences, non-human animals, the ecosystem, through a methodology of interdisciplinary analysis. So, as I previously said, this was presented by Michel Foucault in his speech in 1975 to 76. So, in simple words, the biopolitics can also be defined as the factors such as birth rates, mortality rates, and biological disabilities and environmental influences, or these are the particular areas of interventions. And the practice of biopolitics begins with each and every individual, and the power is distributed equally to all, though it may vary depending on the situation in which the power has been used. So, as Shiprah ma'am has quoted, power should be maintained to create a democratic political order. So, with this, I can also highlight the fact that in a universal level, we are selecting, in a democratic country, we are selecting our rulers with our own power, the right to vote, and they are ruling us for the 5 years with their own power and determine what we have to do. And this paper that I have chosen has two individual topics: the individual choice of alienation, that is the protagonist who decides, who chose herself as a vegetarian and avoids meats after a traumatizing dream, and the distribution of power in the family. So this is the simple definition of biopolitics that I have given. Biopolitics, the politics and the management of life. And as I mentioned previously, each and every individual and a family and a community, a group that forms the society, and society forms the government. So everyone has their own powers. As said, in the novel The Vegetarian by Han Kang, she wrote this as three novellas, respectively, but it was later translated by Deborah Smith into a single novel with three parts in 2015, and it was published. So, with the three part, in the first part itself, we can see that it was set in a first person narrative narrated by Yong Hai's husband, Mr. Cheong. So he describes about his wife's attitude and her regular routine works. And he says that about also his complexes and his, along with her professional life and work. She works as a comic bubble writer in a contract, and she was less talkative and more of an introvert kind of a person. So he also mentioned that if their week offs, day offs currently coincidentally meet on the same day, she wouldn't even ask him to take her out. So this kind of person was she exactly. And she normally didn't spend much time over talking on the mobile phones or with her colleagues or going out with them as well. She used to read books and do her works. So with this information, he proceeds further in his narration, and he finds that one day in the early morning, she was completely into a different person, standing in the dark in front of a fridge, throwing all of the meat in her house, and says that I had a dream. This is what she first mentioned in her. So, as Dr. Rufus sir said, traumas should be remembered. So she also had a traumatic dream, which she was in a butcher house, as Senival ma'am has mentioned, and she was completely wet in the blood, and also there's something which is raw meat. So she was completely traumatized by that, and after that, she completely avoids meat. Not only meat, she throw eggs, and also she ignores milk, which is not even considered as a meat or a non-veg. So I would like to highlight a universal fact that how this biopolitics influence on every individual. The example that I have quoted is the China's one-child policy, which has been introduced in 1979. So this one-child policy was implemented by the respective government to control the population, which has been a huge issue in those days. So they asked every families to bear only one child. So they try to manage the population to distribute all the resources to them. So I've also mentioned another image. Not only this policy was completely successful, it also had some of the most drastic effects, such as there won't be any younger people to take care of the own parents, because we may not exactly say that they might have died or something, but there are certain chances that they might have to step out of their own family. So there will be that this was one of the problem. And also, with this universal example, I would like to highlight the fact that the power which has been distributed equally to the individuals, but when a person asks, that the situation that we are in has to be highlighted, that if we are against them or we are with them. So with this, we are going to move into the topics. So this was the practice of biopolitics begins with each and every individual, and the power has been distributed on equally to all. And this power can be in also in such as another forms like loyal relationship in the name of family, friends, or any other commitments or groups. So with this, we are moving further into the text of Han Kang. So I would like to narrate about the dream that she had. So it plays a major part in the first part, which makes her to turns into a vegetarian. So she says that after she says that I had a dream, she narrates about the dream to her husband. Says that the dream has been set in a dark woods, so there won't be any people. It is like a barn, and there was a building, and she can saw that the bamboo sticks, which has been blood coated, and the blood was still dripping down, and she was started to running through the valley. Her clothes was completely wet with the blood. So she feels that it wasn't a dream, it was actually a reality. So she feels that, but her husband narrates that she wasn't like this before, because he also describes about the way she cooks meat was completely unique, and says that she was one of the finest cooks when it comes to prepare meat. He also describes about the way of cooking that she uses. And in this, the first part of alienation, so she herself alienated from others, from the society, from her family, from her husband itself. So they went to a party, to a dinner party, so where her husband and his colleagues were there after the decision of making herself to be a vegetarian. So there was a cold discussion which has been followed by the boss's wife, where she mentions that there will be they had found a mummified body, human body, that when they had been researching that, they founded some traces that the humans from those period have consumed meat. So she says that isn't that natural for a human being to consume meat from the older days. So also she says that if I'm sitting with a vegetarian and I'm eating an octopus or some kind of meat, she will saw me as a monster. So with this, she has been alienated, and as Srinivasan ma'am said, she was the center of the attention for the topic, as she is a vegetarian. But she didn't voice out for herself. Rather, her husband interrupts this topic and this speech and says that she had some health issues like gastroenteritis, so the dietitian has advised her to avoid meat. So with she also agreed with that. She didn't say that I had a dream or something like that. She remained silent throughout the party and didn't eat much except fruits. So through this scene, we can see that how an individual was alienated with the own decision that she took because of the trauma she had experienced. So we can see that the trauma will affect a person mentally, physically, and emotionally. And also, I like to highlight one of my personal experience, but it didn't last like the protagonist of the story. But this is one of my experience. I too had a dream like that, but it affect only for 2 to 3 days in a normal person. But since this was written by Han Kang, so she made her protagonist throughout the novel travels like the decision. She respects her decision, her choice, and travels with that forever. And in the next scene, after the meeting itself, the story set was set in a dinner of the family gathering where the parents of Yong Hai, In Hai, and her husband, along with the child, was in a table, and they tried to force feed her. Before this incident, we can also see that Mr. Xiong has called his the father of Yong Hai to say that she was completely vegetarian. When he apologized to him for not taking care of her, he says that this is completely wrong to hear that her the word sorry or apologize from a man. So we can see that how patriarchal man was in those days. And when they were in the gathering, they tried to force feed her. She refused to eat, but they didn't leave her. They tried when they tried to give her the beef, or she started to spit out the food that the mother gave. And there will be a time where the parents, along with the sister and the brother of in Yong Hai, will held her and grasp her through the hands, and they tried to force feed her, but she somehow managed to escape from them and cut her wrist. And also she was admitted to the hospital, where she says that she admitted the fact to that husband that after the dream she was also physically affected by the dream. She felt a lump in her chest, and she says that it was not able to there was no chance for herself to breathe. And she says that whatever the meat that she has consumed throughout her life, and the life that she took for eating this meat, that life has been stored and making her uncomfortable to breathe. And also she believes that no one can save her from this condition. And in the next part, the distribution of power in the family. So the second part was set unnamed as the Mongolian mark. So there will this part takes place after the 2 years of this incident. And by concluding the first part, she finds herself without any dress and near the fountain of the hospital, with a red bird in her hand. So we can also interpret or says that in a way that the bird represents herself, the part in which herself, the meat eating part of herself has been died. So, and then in the next part we can see the distribution of power along the family. So the sister in his husband, who's an artist, but he didn't get placed in any job or something, and he didn't earn that much. Rather, the sister, young high sister in high, has earned something through her business. So he was an artist who used to paint and do some videographies, but he didn't even earn a single penny to the family. So he managed to convince Young Hai to her video to pose as a model, and he took advantage of her physical and mental state and tried to harass her in every possible way. However, Young Hai, who had lost her mind after this dream and disturbed by it, she was also losing her weight, but she agrees to that. He painted the flowers on her body and she believed that the paintings would stop the dreams from recurring. She hoped, Young Hai hoped that when the paintings wore off, he would paint it again. So, with this emotional disturbance or emotionally disturbed mind, he used it and harassed her. But Young Hai was not fully aware of what she was doing. Once everything was over, Young Hai was in prison after the doctors confirmed that he mentally ill. But he somehow escaped from the prison and went into hidings, and Inhai never saw him again. So by this incident, we can witness that though he was not a direct blood related person to Young Hai, but in the name of family, in the name of a relative, he has misused his power over her, and she didn't spoke for herself or do any sort of action or reach out to anyone in this situation. And in the next part, the flaming trees, we can see that Inhai's husband also leaves her, and Inhai take care of her sister along with her son. So she was admitted into another hospital, but the situation has become more erratic. So she used to run into the woods, stand there, and she started to act like a tree, imagining herself as a tree. And in that particular scene, the author mentions that she was standing with her hands upside down, saying herself as a tree and doing the photosynthesis. So with this, we can see that how strong she was stuck with her decision to be a vegetarian, and the doctors tried to give her meat in every possible way, but she refuses to eat, and they also injected her through some medicines or trips, but she also losing too much of weight, which made them impossible to feed her through the veins. So they started to send or administer the food through tranquilizers, but it was end in a violent way that she bite one of the nurse or doctor, and she was immediately sent to another hospital as the situation became more worse. So at this point, when where they were in the ambulance, in Hai, sister of Young Hai, thinks that this all should be a dream, but she can't accept the fact that where things all went wrong, she could have prevented her parents from force feeding her sister, or she could have prevented her husband from misbehaving with her own sister, or she could have compelled her sister's husband to be with her and support her and to recover her from this unhealthy condition. But she looks out of the windows into the trees and waiting for an answer, as she is protesting against something that she doesn't understand. So by highlighting this incident, we can see that even though she is not in a parental position who always decides the future of their own son or daughter or whoever it may be, but being a sister, she really took care of her young Hai without losing hope. Even in the end, she was like, yes, I can, there will be any possible way to recover her from this. So we can see the distribution of power both in a negative perspective, in which the artist, the husband of Inhai, has misused, and the power that which Inhai has used to save her sister in every possible ways. So the conclusion is the concept of biopolitics won't always revolve around the entire nation, but it also operates in every person. So as I mentioned, it varies depending upon the situation. And with this, we are highlighting that the family acts as a microcosmic representation of societal and governmental controls. And thank you for giving me this great opportunity to present my paper.
Thank you, Ganesh, for that insightful paper and for connecting it to biopolitics. I would like to congratulate all three paper presenters, young paper presenters, for showing for having being so knowledgeable and delving into the text and relating it to theory and peace studies in theory related to politics, to democracy, to statehood. You have done a lot of thinking, Ganesh, and you have connected the ideas very well. Thank you for presenting such a a very engaging presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
And you're only a first PG student, and you have done marvelously well. So,
Thank you, ma'am.
and one of the takeaways from your paper for me was how meat eating is a trope for exploring violence. The violence against a lady who is actually having a mental health issue. She's and as both Senyavel and Ganesh pointed out, it's not about vegetarianism; it's about her withdrawal and and uh, unwittingly the family is violent.
Yes, ma'am.
They try to draw her back into communication with the family or being involved while she's withdrawing, and they end up being violent, doing a disservice to her rather than helping her out. Actually, do you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, initially she does not wear her inner garments, and then she goes topless for some time, and there's no promiscuity about it. It's just her mental health. So this connects to something that happened when we were students in WCC. There was a lady who was walking on the road without clothes, and the entire college witnessed it. And the entire college witnessed it. It happened on College Road, and that incident was the one which triggered the founders of Banyan to start that institute called Banyan for women having mental health issues. So I just wanted to share that. I would invite Dr. Rufus to respond to the papers, because his insights would be very valuable. Sir, can you respond to the papers, sir? While we wait for Rufus, may I request our patron, Doc- Dr. Srilata, to respond to the papers?
Yeah, I was really enjoying myself listening. I mean, listening to those very, the way in which they went about uh, talking about. I mean, exploring the themes uh, that to where I mean, exploring all the themes that the author had presented in the paper, especially with relating to peace. After, of course, listening to Dr. Rufus's very I mean, what is that? I mean, great introduction to peace studies itself. He gave us a very insightful thing from the, presentation from the earliest period to, where till now I think we hadn't talked about literature in our. So far we've been dealing with resolution, conflict, peace, and all that. But I think he went back to talk about how literature started, right, with uh, what do you call the Renaissance and giving importance to humanity. So that bit, and that from that stems all the rest of the theoretical concepts that we have been using today. Very importantly, this theme of peace is so very relevant to our times, at home and in the community and between nations. So I like charity, everything begins at home. So the papers under see the papers that were researched, the books that were researched today, I think they kept all three of them, gave very interesting insights into the theme that they had chosen. And some of them, Senya Wales thing on explanations on how vegetarianism or non-vegetarianism both, I think, it's one conflict within me, whether, which of it is aggressive and which of it is well, which of it is actually acceptable. Both are okay. So I was happy with that. The way in which Gane also presented his insights into the, into the way in which power worked inside families, and how it wrecked lives, to how we generally don't tend to understand certain things as they should be, done, and how small mistakes can cause big, small misunderstandings can make, and want people wanting to stick to one perspective, wanting everybody to follow that perspective, causes a lot of agony for others. All this, I sat back and enjoyed the way in which you unraveled all those, because I haven't read any of the novels myself. So I'm happy that our researchers are really, putting their heart and soul into the way research should be going. I'm happy with that. Thank you, all three of you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Sir, are you available now? Um, while we wait for sir, we can have responses from the audience. Anyone wants to give their response? So I have a question for our first presenter, Shiprah.
Yes,
Um,
ma'am.
yeah. Uh, Shiprah, can you comment on the structure of the, of this writing, Human Acts? I found that very interesting. You quoted from each section, and in the way this it is structured. No, do you have any comment to make about that? The
Yes,
chapters, the boy's friend. Yes.
yes. It's basically the stories of Dongo and his friends, and all. The major chapters are set till from the boy to the chapter the factory girl 2002. Uh, the 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 chapters are structured in a way that every characters are interconnected, and how the main story, though it the novel says that it's about the characters, about characters and their lives. It gives a holistic, and it gives an insights about what happened in actually happened in the political and the societal uh, of South Korea in 1980. And also, I like the perspective in which especially the narration in the second person narration she has Han Khan has taken to represent her the story. Uh, it's in the since it's in the second person narration, we get into you understand the character through their eyes of the characters, and I really appreciate it. And also I want the final chapter, the epilogue, the writer 2013, we see that the writer is none other than Han Khan, where she herself places her and it's noted that Han Khan was born in Gwangju when she was and when she was 9 years old, the family they identified that there's a tension going on in that district, and they shifted to Seoul, the city. And even though she's back to the in the final chapter, it's viewed that she is back to the city, and she to the town, and she views the place, and she goes and visits uh, the places of where the massacre had happened. And it's really the book is really universally heartbreaking, said by the magazine Independent, and it's also universally traumatizing. Every person, every country who has been under the rule of the totalitarian regime, or every country who is in the wage of having a totalitarian regime into their country, can connect with this book. And I feel uh, this book through this book I got a greater insight into what politically usually when the cultural part of the country is only projected, the good, I mean to say, the good looks of of a country is only projected in the media. But only when you read about the text like these, you get into what is actually happening, what happening and what has happened in that country. And I wish similar books like this could have I know that many books about the partition of India has been written, but I wish more books about the partition of India uh, could have been released. I know that it says in the chapter uh, the factory girl, Sion Jones, she says that when her memoir is she finds it really hard to go back in time and recall the trauma. But the reporter, the person who is collecting her stories, he insists her to tell the stories, because only when they tell the stories, only when they present the truth, they can have their justice. I wish I saw in a recent interview a person who was at that time of the partition of India. He says that it took for him nearly 80 years to talk about the trauma, and only when traumas like this, when they are addressed and when they are published, justice can be given. I find it really thought provoking. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I think you dwelt a lot on structural violence. No, how because this is about this whole uprising was against dictatorship and the different sections of society. The freedom of the press. We saw the editor and then the prison situation, the prisoner, the factory girl. That's very nicely explored, and thank you so much. Between Ganesh and Senyavel, whoever would like to go first, uh, would you like to say anything about the connection between inner peace and individual peace and societal peace that your the novels you read connected with?
May I go first, ma'am? May I, ma'am?
Rufus
Am I audible?
Rufus sir was talking about individual peace. Yes, yes.
Yes, ma'am. So
Go ahead.
you rightly asked this question, the connection between individual peace and societal peace. Actually, when I was working on this, I read this a book on trauma and recovery by Judith Herman. She points out that trauma unhealed actually creates hidden concentration camps at home. So when something is not fine inside, obviously it's going to reflect quite terribly outside. And there was this one um, a painter in England called Richard Dad, I believe. So he actually killed his father, and later that imitation of violence was painted by him in a canvas, and he was actually appreciated for the artistic soul he is, and also he was sentenced for the violent psycho killer he is. So only when there's, to use the words of former President APJ, when there's order at home, I mean, when there's harmony at home, there'll be order in the nation. So being fulfilled inside, being calm inside actually has a huge part to play in the society. And also, fascinatingly, we find this statue in this British museum where we have Mars sleeping and Venus being awake, symbolically meaning that the god, when the god of war, when war lies, love is awake. So when love is, I mean, when love is present, there cannot be war. So the importance of love, the importance of inner harmony is actually directly associated to the harmony and lack of mayhem in the society.
Mm. Ganesh, do you want to
Yes, ma'am.
say something? You want to respond to that?
No, ma'am.
Yes, Ganesh, do you have anything to add, or do you have any comment to make about? Yeah. Okay. I just thought I would, even in this family and the vegetarian, I felt that Asianness was there. I feel bad about using that, stereotyping as Asian, but the family is violent, very much like our Indian and Asian families, force feeding, everybody getting involved in the individual's affair and imposing on the individual. I felt that was a
Yes, ma'am.
very Asian culture behavior associated with Asian culture, the whole family coming into the picture and each one interfering in the other person's life. They are a close knit family. At the same time, they're all imposing on her. They decide on putting her in a mental health institute, and there, the violence, uh, that she experiences in the hospital. So I just thought I'd make I'll talk about that as well. Sir, are you
Yes, ma'am.
there?
I have a point to share, ma'am.
Yes, Ganesh, tell me.
Yes, ma'am. So as you have mentioned that this family has represented the Asian, so this the parallel that I have
Ganesh, go
connected.
ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are.
Yes, ma'am. So the parallels that I have connected with the point that you have previously mentioned that this family has more of Asianness in controlling, taking control over decision or choice in her own life. It was actually the Western culture who where the parents will be leave the child to take their own decisions in their life according to who they are, the path they chose. They won't interrupt in any ways. But in this, you as I mentioned the China's one child policy from 1979, ma'am. There was an article that I've read in a Tamil newspaper in 2015 or 16. I forget the year, ma'am, but where it has stated that the government has implemented such a rule in which that the second child, if it is accidentally, even if it is accidentally born, they won't receive any rights from the government, the scholarships, not even their identity cards or the official government birth certificates or the inheritance from their parents. So we can see that how the government in the name of power has implement and decide whatever the every individual had to do in their own life. So with that parallel, with that universal example I have mentioned that, so they act, the family of young high act as the governmental, man, so governmental and society. So similar to that, they won't respect her choice or whatever she thinks in her mind, rather they imposes what they want to in the name of, they says that we are taking care of her because by avoiding eating the meat she's losing weight and she started to act weird. So they would like to fix her by giving her meat. So they had decided this would be the solution, and they didn't even consult her choice. So I just bring out the parallels from the real world and the fictional world that
Yeah,
Han Kang has created, man.
that's a very interesting connection that you're making, that the family represents the government.
Yes, ma'am. And
The,
also
you know,
the
the,
one, yes,
mm,
ma'am. The one child policy was again changed to two child policy by the same government in 2015, ma'am. I was reading this on a website. So they again also imposing their power on the family to do what they need to do. So we can say that as well as an alternative, ma'am.
yeah, no, individual freedom and the state will always be, in conflict. So I think we can
Yes, ma'am.
actually wind up.
And also we
I think, yeah, tell me.
Yes, ma'am. So also we can say that the power to the government was given by the people who are living in that, and they were also controlled by the powers that they given to them, ma'am.
True, and you rightly brought in the idea of biopolitics, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that is a kind of way of, connecting and placing a finger on what the power equations involved, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Um, yes, can we have the vote of thanks?
Yes, ma'am. As we approach the conclusion, I take this opportunity to express my gratitude to everyone who made this webinar possible. Thank you so much, Dr. Maria Preethi Srinivasan ma'am, for your guidance and leadership. And a heartfelt thanks to Dr. Samuel Rufus sir for his inspiring keynote address. And to our brilliant paper presenters, your efforts are deeply appreciated. And finally, I would like to thank the audience for your active participation and enthusiasm. With that, we conclude this enriching session. Let us take inspiration from Han Kang's works to continue fostering peace and reconciliation in our own spheres. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, and thanks to Snowlin for organizing this event. She sent out the invites, she prepared the invite and the link, and all the work behind the scenes has been done by Snowlin. Thanks to also the students PG students who curated this event, the In Tandem team. Um,
Syed.
for brilliant comparing, and Elekia, Nishi, Mahalakshmi. Thank you, in tandem team. Thank you, Srilata ma'am, for always supporting us. And thank you, everyone. Thank you to all my colleagues in the Department of English for joining us on this call, first and second PG students, and others from other institutions who have joined us. Thank you. Please join us tomorrow. We have an in tandem session on um, agencies of empowerment and social transformation. That also in the context of peace studies. Thank you.